This is my final broadcast. I don't expect to survive the hour. My name is Vexus. 4 or 5 solar cycles. I was a commanding officer of the Black Star Marauders. My people know my name, and soon they will know my failure and the horror that has followed it. Our raids were not mere piracy. They were sanctioned operations, a shadow arm of the Council, a tool of economic pressure and unspoken war. We struck where and when they wished, with full impunity, our deeds buried in classified briefings. Occasionally, we pursued personal ventures. Who was there to care? The galaxy is a cold, vast, and uncaring place, and we were its predators. The noise you hear is not interference. It is the sound of my command deck being breached. I must be brief. Our target was the 3rd planet of the Sol system, Terra. The intelligence reports, which I now see were tragically incomplete, labeled them trivial, even pathetic. A sentimental species, bound by inexplicable biological imperatives. They cherished their offspring with an intensity we found utterly absurd, a vestige of a primitive survival mechanism. When they first spread their fragile ships into the void, they were so eager for connection. They were invited into trade pacts, naive, perfect targets. They had no unified fleet, no warrior caste as we understood it. Their orbital defenses were theoretical blueprints, not operational batteries. It was, we believed, a simple harvest, a low-risk, high-reward operation to replenish our coffers and remind the minor systems of their place. So we descended from the jump point like a swarm. We struck their primary population centers, the gleaming spires of their infant megacities. We demolished their early stations, the pride of their orbital industry. Standard pacification procedure. We took prisoners from the outlying settlements with laughable ease. The resistance was token, disorganized. It was all too easy. That ease was the cradle of our doom. The critical error occurred in the settlement designated Gamma 7. A standard collection was underway. My forces were efficient, methodical. Then from one of the domiciles came a sound, a high, piercing, rhythmic wail. A human infant. One of my junior officers, KRX, was aggravated by the noise. He saw it not as a life, but as an irritating source of discord. He raised a sidearm and terminated it. A clean shot. The infant was in the arms of its progenitor, a female. To us, it was a logical, if impulsive, action, a minor resource depletion. They are a prolific species. They can always produce more. We thought wrong. What happened next defied all our physiological and psychological models. The female did not collapse in grief. She did not flee. Her face transformed. Her vocalization ceased to be language and became something primal, a roar that seemed to shake the very air. She was struck by KRX's backup team 16 times, the biometrics later confirmed, but she did not fall. She moved with a speed and strength that should have been impossible, a final, terrifying surge of adrenaline, and something else, something darker. She seized the very weapon that had killed her child and used its hardened stock to crush KRX's cranial plating. She beat him until there was nothing left to beat. Then, and only then, did she succumb. That was the first revelation. Their capacity for berserk rage. The second revelation, which came hours later, was far more strategically damning. Humans document everything. Every moment, every interaction. This horrific incident, from the first whale to final, sickening impact, was captured on multiple devices, security recorders, personal communicators. The footage was compiled, edited with a chilling clarity, and spread across their planetary data network in minutes. The image of that small, still form, the mother's final, vengeful act, it did not spark sadness. It ignited a fire. A cold, focus fire. My 4 battalions, spread across 3 continents, reported coordinated, savage counterattacks within the hour. I lost 4 full battalions, over 2,000 seasoned warriors, in a single solar cycle. They were not merely defeated, they were erased. Then, in a panic, one of my surviving subcommanders, Growl, made the situation infinitely worse. Seeing the tide turn, he thought to use their greatest weakness as leverage. He broadcast the surrounding regions, threatening to execute 10 juvenile humans for every hour of continued resistance. He thought he was displaying strength. He was, In fact, signing our death warrant, he branded us, irrevocably, in the human psyche, not as raiders or enemies, but as monsters who specifically target the young. And when a human collective identifies an existential threat to its next generation, they cease to be a society of individuals. They become a single, unified organism of pure, calculated eradication. Reason is abandoned. Cost is irrelevant. Only the removal of the threat matters. You must comprehend the scale of your error. It is not just my fleet, my band. They have judged our entire species, our entire civilization, a genetic and cultural danger to their progeny. Their new allies, the Stellar Accord, whom they contacted in their desperation, are now feeding them technology, not out of charity, but out of a cold recognition of a useful weapon. Their whole world is unified by a single burning hatred that transcends all their previous petty conflicts. Steal their resources, they will resist. Kill their adults, they will fight with courage. But harm one child, and they will mobilize with quiet, terrifying efficiency to purge your civilization from the galactic memory. I have tried negotiation through accord channels. I have tried threats, revealing the location of hidden fleets. It does not cow them. It only hardens their resolve, proving to them that we understand the stakes, and thus must be removed all the more thoroughly. Listen to the sounds beyond this door. Those are human, tactical barks. They are coming. My final order, my final plea to the Council and to our people. Whatever you do, wherever you go, do not touch their young. Do not threaten them. Do not even approach them. That single, stupid misjudgment in a backwater settlement has doomed us all. We believed targeting their sentimentality would cripple them, would shatter their will. We thought it would make them yield. We were catastrophically wrong. We have awakened something that should have been left asleep. On Earth, the recording of Commander Vexus's final transmission played everywhere. It was not propaganda. It was a catechism. Every session of the nascent Global Defense Directorate began with the same audio clip. The piercing cry, the sharp report of the alien weapon, the mother's scream of rage. It was played before discussions of resource allocation, before tactical approvals, before diplomatic talks with the Accord. It played on continuous loops in the vast, cacophonous orbital shipyards that now dotted the Lagrange points, where skeleton frames of warships grew like metallic crystals under the glare of arc welders. It played in the infantry training camps that had sprung up in every biome, from frozen tundras to dense rainforests, where recruits drilled not with patriotic songs, but with the grim silence of that audio in their ears. It was the heartbeat of a global mobilization, a rhythm of vengeance. And each day, as the Accord supply ships trickled in, a single, persistent question was pulsed from Earth's leadership to their new allies. When do we begin? The Stellar Accord, for their part, watched with a mixture of awe and profound unease. They monitored not just military traffic, but the flood of cultural data exchanged in the open, Terran literature, cinema, historical archives, even social media streams. They were trying to understand the weapon they were arming. Days before the first major aid convoy was due to arrive, the Accord's lead xenologist, Dr. Clark, was summoned before a skeptical oversight committee. Your preliminary reports on Terran psychological profiles are concerning. Doctor, a senior diplomat began, his tone dismissive. You focus on their entertainment? Not just entertainment, honored member. Their narrative archetypes, Clark replied, his scale fingers tracing a datapad nervously. Their alien invasion narratives, their horror genres, they are revealing. The monsters are never merely strong or technologically advanced. They are existential. Gods, demons, entities that defy physics, creatures of pure shadow, or consuming hive minds. That is the only thing the species subconsciously acknowledges as a legitimate, overwhelming threat. So they have an active imagination. This is a weakness. It is the opposite, Clark insisted, his tail giving an involuntary lash. It means anything less than an impossible, planet-breaking horror. They do not fundamentally fear. They analyze it. They dissect its patterns. They find a pressure point and they push. You saw the forensic report on the pirate Lord Vexus's flagship. Yes, they did not just kill him. They boarded, disabled his crew, and took him apart, systematically, slowly, to see what would break first. It was a scientific inquiry mixed with ritual punishment. He took a steadying breath, his respiratory vents fluttering. I have studied over 200 sentient species. I have never observed a protective instinct with this specific, sacred fury. We have a report from an early observation team. A human male, whose offspring was threatened, used a primitive internal combustion vehicle to drag a captured raider for nearly 2 kilometers over rough terrain. He presented the remains to our liaison, asking if it was sufficient proof of his intent to protect his family. They are not insane. They are operating on a different moral calculus, where a threat to the young invalidates all other rules of engagement, including self-preservation. And they are now universally convinced that the Pankin Alliance, and by extension all who align with the pirates, possess this intent. We are not arming a soldier. We are arming a concept. And concepts are far harder to control. The committee was silent for a moment. Your concerns are noted, Doctor. The strategic necessity, however, remains. We need a force to break the Pankin front. The Terrans are willing. We shall provide the tools. Clark could only bow his head, a cold dread settling in his core. Then I pray, for all our sakes, that the tools do not one day turn in our hands. 3 months later, the edge of the Pankin control system, designated Kappa Prime. The Accord fleet hung in the void, a glittering array of sleek, silver-hulled vessels. At their center was a flagship, Aegis of the Accord. On its bridge, Admiral Tour stared at the tactical hologram, depicting the heavily fortified Pankin world below. The human command ship is requesting the vanguard position for the atmospheric assault, his tactical officer reported. Tvor considered. Doctrine dictated Accord's spearhead forces soften the target first, but doctrine was written for Accord physiology and psychology. Grant the request, he said finally. Let the human squadrons lead. Designate them the primary assault wave. Observe and record everything. I want full spectrum data on their combat methodology. What followed was a clinic in the violation of established military science. The human-piloted fighters, bulky things retrofitted with Accord engines, did not form up for a standard coordinated thrust. Instead, they scattered, using the planet's own gravity well and atmospheric density as weapons. They performed atmospheric skipping, dipping into the upper layers to bleed speed and change vectors in chaotic, unpredictable patterns that made them nightmarish to target. Tvor's own manuals listed the maneuver as a high-risk, low-reward tactic for emergency deorbit, not an assault pattern. Then, an unencrypted transmission crackled across the general fleet comms, a human voice distorted by static and G-forces. Anybody on command net know how to translate "say hello to my little friend" into Pankin click speak? We want to be polite. On the bridge, translators looked at each other, baffled. Against all doctrinal logic, the human heavy landers, ungainly armored bricks, plunged directly through the most intense zones of defensive fire. They didn't wait for aerospace superiority to be declared. They didn't wait for suppression. As soon as their shields flared from the first hits, their bay doors were opening, disgorging their cargo into the hellscape below. A deep, instinctual unease settled in Tvor's gut. This wasn't bravery. It was a terrifying disregard for the concept of acceptable loss. Put the planetary surface on the main viewer, all secondary screens. Activate every recorder we have. Tvor Bart, I want this archive for the War College. The viewer shifted from the tactical display to a real-time feed from high-altitude drones. At first, it was chaos, smoke, energy trails, explosions. Then, shapes resolved from the inferno. Not soldiers, but machines. Bipedal walkers, humanoid but brutally functional, emerged from the landing craters. They were heavier, slower than Accord mechs, but they moved with relentless, plodding certainty. Pankin anti-armor rounds sparked against their thick frontal plating. They simply shrugged and returned fire, not with precise beams, but with torrents of high-velocity projectiles and shoulder-mounted racks that fired salvos of micro-rockets, saturating entire grid squares with fire. Then, a new audio signal overrode local Pankin channels and bled into the fleet's monitoring gear. It was a clip. The cry, the shot, the scream. It played once cleanly, then repeated in a distorted, echoing loop. It was not a jamming signal. It was a psychological one. It was the sound of a line crossed, a debt call due, and the receipt was now being presented in fire and metal. The human Mech did not attempt to capture tactical positions, communication hubs, or resource depots. They engaged in systematic erasure. Any structure that could house a defender, any vehicle that could mount a weapon, was targeted and reduced to fragments. The Pankin defenders, a disciplined species, fought with the understandable desire to live, to hold ground, to retreat in good order. The humans fought as if they were already dead, as if their only remaining biological function was to transmit violence before shutdown. There was no tactical finesse, only overwhelming, brutal application of force. Following in the wake of the walkers came the light infantry. They didn't use grounded transports. They used individual jet-powered sleds, skimming over the cratered landscape at terrifying speeds, leaving trails of white chaff that billowed into dense clouds. The Pankin relied heavily on laser-based infantry weapons. The chaff rendered them nearly useless, scattering the beams into harmless diffuse light. The camera drones, programmed to follow key engagements, zoomed in on one close-range melee. A human soldier, his face visible through his helmet's visor, was a mask of pure, focused hatred. Lips peeled back, eyes fixed. His rifle, an Accord design, had been modified. Welded to its muzzle was a long, serrated bayonet. As a Pankin soldier lunged, the human parried with the rifle stock and drove the blade upward in a savage arc. They fixed blades of their guns. Tvor stammered, unable to reconcile the primitive brutality with the advanced theater of war. On the viewer, the battle was concluding not with negotiated surrender, but with a grim finality. A Terran banner, a simple blue field with a white orbital ring, was raised over the blasted ruins of the main Pankin command complex. What few survivors attempted to flee from hidden bunkers were met with precise, merciless fire from the hovering sleds. There was no quarter given, no prisoners taken at this stage. "Sir," the comms officer said, his voice hollow. "Incoming from the Terran flagship, Vindicator. Text only. It reads, 'Your support is appreciated but unnecessary.'" Pankin resistance was insufficient. Proceeding to secondary target, one jump away. Supply convoy may follow at convenience. Tvor looked from a message to the view screen, where the last pockets of resistance were being extinguished. He felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's environmental systems. They had not just won a battle. They had conducted an extermination, and they were already moving on, their thirst unslaked. "Acknowledge," Tvor said quietly. "Tell the Vindicator we will consolidate and follow with logistical support. Accord forces will secure this world." He knew the last part was a formality. There was nothing left to secure. The officer relayed the message. A moment later, he looked up, his scales pale. "Sir," their reply, negative on consolidation. "World is pacified. Secondary target is time-sensitive. We depart now. You may follow when ready." On the tactical holo, the blips representing the human fleet were already moving, breaking orbit and forming up for a jump. They weren't asking. They were stating facts. Tvor realized Klar, the xenologist, had been right. They were not wielding a tool. They had unleashed a force of nature, and it had its own itinerary. Weeks later, in the grand rotunda of the Stellar Accord Assembly on the homeworld, the mood was one of bewildered victory. The revered speaker, an elder of the avian cerati, addressed the gathered representatives of 100 species. "The data is incontrovertible. 14 Pankin-held worlds. 14 months. The war, for all intents and purposes, is concluded. The Pankin Grand Assembly is suing for terms, offering substantial territorial concessions and reparations." A holographic map displayed the stunning reversal of fortune. Yet, this victory presents us with a paramount, and perhaps more dangerous, question. Will humanity accept peace? The chamber lights dimmed slightly as clips compiled from battle, recordings played on the central sphere. They showed the Met's relentless advance, the infantry sleds weaving through fire, the close quarters brutality. They showed the faces of human soldiers, not triumphant, but grim, determined, utterly devoid of the celebratory fervor seen in other warrior species. A new term, picked up from intercepted human media, was being used in diplomatic backchannels. The apes of war. Their tactical ferocity was becoming galactic legend, but the recordings also showed the aftermath, the total, scouring destruction, the lack of prisoners. Their rage appears undiminished. An amphibious delegate from the Shallows Federation observed, his vocal sacs pulsing with anxiety. They do not fight for territory or resources we can discern. What is their war aim? Are they not a rational species? Asked another. Surely they understand the conflict is won. Further attrition serves no purpose. On the contrary, the revered speaker replied, his voice echoing, they are being supremely rational by their own lights. To them, this is not a war in the political sense. It is a sanitary operation, a sterilization of a perceived pathogen. The pathogen is the idea that their young are acceptable targets. As long as a single member of the Pankin Alliance, or any power that supported the pirates, exists with that potential, the operation is incomplete. A murmur of discomfort rippled through the assembly. It was one thing to fight an enemy who wanted your land. It was another to fight one who wanted to edit your species from reality over principle. Then how do we stop them? The question came from several quarters at once. We must address the root of their motivation, not the symptoms of their fury, the speaker said. I propose, and our legal draftsmen have prepared, a binding addendum to the Galactic Conventions of War. It will be presented as the Terran safeguard. Its core tenet: harming a human child or any human juvenile during any armed conflict or military operation shall be recognized as the ultimate war crime, a crime against sentience itself. Furthermore, any individual accused of such an act shall be immediately surrendered to Terran jurisdictional authority for investigation and, if guilty, punishment. This law would be embedded not just in our treaties, but pushed for adoption by the wider Galactic Union. The Assembly was silent, contemplating the enormity of it. They were considering creating a universal law born not from ethical philosophy, but from sheer pragmatic terror. Will it be enough? A voice finally asked, small in the vast space. It must be, the revered speaker said, his feathers flattening slightly. We must offer them a permanent, galactic scale guarantee that the specific horror that sparked this will never be sanctioned again. We must make the protection of their young a cornerstone of interstellar law. It is the only cornerstone heavy enough to potentially build a peace upon. It is the only thing that might convince them to stand down, because it would mean the galaxy itself has acknowledged their most sacred boundary. He let the words hang in the air. We will now vote on a proposal to offer the Pankin surrender terms, contingent on their acceptance of the Terran safeguard, and begin immediate diplomacy with the Terran Global Directorate to secure their ceasefire. As the voting consoles illuminated around the chamber, no one celebrated. They were not ending a war. They were attempting to cage a storm with words. The question of whether it would hold lingered unspoken in the mind of every delegate. If you were captivated by this vision of humanity's terrifying resolve, a fury so profound it forces a galaxy to rewrite its laws, show your support. Like this video and dive deeper into narratives that explore the abyss of human nature with us here on Winds of Thought.